Thank you all. So with this, I'm calling the meeting to order, and I would like to welcome all the attendees and introduce the board members who are visible to you. The board is made up of the regional directors and 4 at-large members for whom the whole community, the whole membership votes. Regional directors are elected by their local chapters. So I'm going to introduce to you the executive board. That's myself as president, Diane Dowsimer. Our vice president, are you there? Can we wave at everybody? I'm not seeing, where is he? Not visible.
I think Ramsey Geyer dropped off, but hopefully we'll come back on.
Okay, we'll see Ramsey later, perhaps. Our secretary, unfortunately, Charlotte Cummings can't make it today. She herself is attending a funeral, so we will miss her. But Hugh Strawn, who was recently appointed to fill the vacant seat that Tom Gregory is leaving, has agreed to substitute and be the minutes taker today, be our secretary for today. And Hugh, I think, has come on. Is he visible? Not yet, no. But I think he came on, didn't he, Bennett?
I am visible.
That's Jim, and Jim is our treasurer. Yes, thank you, Jim Jandro, who has been a very able and inventive treasurer for the last 6 years. So that's our executive board, and I'm going to ask each of our regional directors to wave, and you will be giving your reports later. So Region 1, which is Charlotte, who is not here. Region 2 is Region 2. Who's Region 2?
That's Ramsey.
Ramsey, who is not on right now. I lost him. Okay, and Region 3 is Richard Greatwood. So if you look around at your membership, there's Hugh. I see him too. He's come in. Region 4 is Pat Birdsall. Region 5, David Baer. Region 6, Sally Jane. Thank you, David. Sally Jane, Region 6. Region 7, Ray Neff. And Region 8, David Rader. And Hugh is with us. And in addition, we have our nominee, and you will hear about that, Michael League, who has joined us too. So that's the leadership of FLiCRA for those of you, and I know you all recognize Bennett Napier, our executive director. My report is brief because we have an extended agenda today, and a few things that I wanted to say. The pandemic has created a period. What? Excuse me. What do you need? John Dowsimer, a former president, sitting beside me, had some instructions for me, which I follow always. So this period of the pandemic has created a lot of stress for all of us, not just residents of CCRCs, but particularly for seniors living in retirement communities and nursing homes and assisted living facilities, having to struggle in isolation and not being with family and support. The resulting stresses in our communities have been a loss of employees in some measure, and the challenges of keeping our staffs current and up to date. We will have an opportunity to hear something about this, I think, from the panel that's going to be speaking later. Having Zoom meetings has proven to be very beneficial for me, and I hope for you. It has enabled us to gather people together who would not otherwise be able to gather. Instead of having to move to a location for an in-person meeting for today, we have people who are able to participate who would not have been able to be in person at that meeting. And for that, I think we have something to be thankful for, because we want our membership to be connected and we want you to feel engaged. On the other hand, it's very difficult to engage with people when you're not in the same space, and we appreciate that. So we hope in the future to be able to resume in-person meetings, but let's value this one for what it gives us and feel comfortable sharing with us and letting us know your questions and your concerns as we go forward in this meeting. I want to commend our chapter presidents and our regional directors for the hard work that they do in sustaining our membership. FLiCRA works very hard to support the well-being and the lives of the residents of CCRCs around the state. But without a membership, a thriving membership, we would not be very effective. And it's our chapter presidents and our regional directors who are helping keep us engaged, engaging new members, and keeping the organization functioning well. It's important for you as members to encourage new membership and for you to participate in your chapters. You know, there are some chapters who are struggling to have leadership, have a president, have somebody engaged in leading the chapter. Please, if you can, volunteer to be on your chapter board, offer to be on to lead the organization so that we can go forward being effective in taking care of our fellow residents. I want to congratulate Rita Shari, who's a resident of Cypress Cove, who recently joined the provider board, the board of directors in her community. This is a direction that we totally support. And for those communities who have residents actively voting on their provider boards, all the more power to you. And we appreciate your participation that way. So since Charlotte is not here to go over the minutes with us, I'm just offering to the whole membership, if there's anybody who has a question, a correction, a change about the minutes that went out from our last year's meeting, I welcome them now. You can put a mention in the chat and let us know what you're thinking about the minutes.
I move the approval of the minutes.
Thank you very much, David. And actually, we don't need a motion and a passing of the motion, but I appreciate the movement forward. And if there are no questions and no corrections, then we'll accept the minutes as submitted. Thank you, David, very much. Next, Jim Jandro, please, would you walk us through your report?
You have received the 30 September. Yes, okay. You have received the 30 September month-end analysis. You received the 30 September financial statement that was included in the packet that was sent to you all. This financial analysis will look at month-end 30 September and also year-to-date from past 3 quarters. For the past 2 months, our revenue and dues have been low because the automated dues chapter delays have been sending their dues to FLiCRA. I believe and still believe that those automated dues will be forthcoming. When I looked at September dues and saw $30,000 that was deposited, I was disappointed because I expected more because of the lagging of several months. Then the 30 September bank statement came in and it did not provide the glimmer of hope that I was looking for. However, as we moved into October, lo and behold, there was Bennett galloping down to Jacksonville in his white stallion, waving several sheets of paper, screaming that during the first half of October, our deposits are $13,000, more than expected for the whole month. And then as we continued to look through the other deposits through the end of October, lo and behold, it confirmed our assumption that yes, most probably by the time we do the month-end and financial analysis that will be balanced. When I look at the other metric, which is expenses, our expenses are, as expected, aligned with our approved 2021 budget. No variances that are significant to mention. I do want to talk about one other thing, though, is a change in the way that FLiCRA has been paying its bills. We are now using bill.com and paying our bills electronically. What this means is that there are no physical checks, and it reduces the probability of fraud. The last topic I want to talk about is the importance of net assets. For several years, we discussed whether the FLiCRA annual membership dues should be increased and by how much. That issue was studied. The recommendation was sent forth to the board of directors, unanimously approved an increase in dues. However, there was a caveat on that. We recognized that at the beginning of the period of increased dues, that more income would be coming in than our typical expenses. And of course, the reverse would happen in the latter years. Thus, the board of directors provided the guidance to the treasurer and the executive director to place the increased net assets into the reserves, invest those funds, both long-term and short-term, in order to have the reserves available in the lean years. To that end, we have placed $45,000 of it into the reserves for a current total of $70,000. And are tentatively planning to add an additional $10,000 to $15,000 at year end. Madam President, that includes my analysis for 30 September 2021 and year to date. Are there any questions?
Hearing none, thank you very much, Jim. Hugh's applauding you. We all applaud you. Thank you very much. Bennett, we have items for about the legislative review and items for delegation action.
Sure. Thank you, Madam President. Just a couple of things on the legislative preview. I think with the open forum, we'll have some opportunity for some direct questions on this, knowing that we started a little bit late. Just to get everybody on board for participation. I'll be somewhat brief on the legislative preview, but just to give a precursor when we get into open forum that we can go into more detail. What we can share, from the attendees that are participating today is the legislature, the next year is obviously an even year. So the legislature now is in a rotation in even years where they start in January. As opposed to March. So it's what we call an earlier session. In fact, the legislative committees are here in Tallahassee this week on the House and Senate side. We have circulated effectively a bill tracking report to your state board of directors for those bills that have been filed thus far. There will continue to be some additional bills that come to fruition, obviously, before things convene in January. At a high level, what we can share is that at this stage, and at this juncture, we don't anticipate any legislation that would come forward on Florida Statute 651, which is the continuing care statute. That's always subject to change, but we don't anticipate that right today. We definitely expect some quite a bit of legislation, as you would be expecting, continuing to revolve around COVID-19 in terms of liability protections for general businesses, which may include healthcare providers, which would be certainly the assisted living and skilled nursing components of continuing care retirement communities. So there will definitely be some further discussion on either some changes to what was passed previously or extensions of what was passed previously. The other big piece that, will be a good segue into our 10 o'clock panel between FLiCRA representatives and leading age representatives is workforce shortages. And so actually this week, there were a coalition of healthcare organizations on the business side, hospitals, assisted living associations, the Healthcare Association, which represents nursing homes, as well as Leading Age Florida. There are discussions to potentially go to the legislature and seek, at least on the nursing home side, a reduction, whether it's temporary or permanent reduction on staffing hours that have been in existence in Florida law for quite some time, given the workforce shortages. I mean, there's an exacerbation of workforce shortages that were present pre-COVID, and certainly with some employers making a decision on mandatory vaccinations. Certainly some staff have decided not to move forward with that and transition to other professions, or certainly leave the healthcare profession. So that's definitely going to be a hot topic, as you would imagine. And so we'll potentially have some time with the panel to probably talk a little bit about that. And so a lot of these best practice discussions that we're going to have in about a half an hour with the panel will probably have some relation to some of the key topics, especially on the skilled nursing assisted living components of your campuses that will impact some of the legislation. There are a couple other things that we would make the group attendees aware. There are two sections of Florida law that relate to what we call an ad valorem taxation at homes for the aged. That effectively is a special section of Florida law. There's one for nonprofits, and there's one for for-profit continuing care retirement communities, whereby your communities receive a tax benefit, knowing that even though you don't have title to your living units, it is your permanent home, and you clearly have invested a significant amount of money to move into the communities. And so there, have been tax credits, if you will, tax savings. So there are bills filed that, at this stage, the language that's been proposed don't affect that in a sense of repealing it by any means. It's really just changing, kind of just clarifying some eligibility for some other providers that fall into that definition. And what we want to make sure is that there's no unfriendly amendments, is what we call them, that would potentially, tinker with or potentially repeal those exemptions that you're currently benefiting from in your community. So those are some of the lead-ins. We'll have more time for some dialogue in the Q&A, especially in the open forum, after the 11:30 break, to get into more detail. And at that time, we'll probably have, we'll promote as panelist William Stander, who is one of FLiCRA's legislative team members, and Eric Thorne, who's our inside general counsel, and myself will add some additional narrative when we have some Q&A with the residents. So at this time, Madam President, I'll talk about the items for delegate action and talk through that process. So again, this is our second year doing a virtual annual conference. As I shared at the beginning, I know we've gotten more people that have signed on since the start. I think we've got 50 continuing care retirement communities participating today around the state, and a number are in auditoriums. So we're grateful to have that kind of engagement and participation. So under the Florida bylaw or FLiCRA bylaws, each chapter has a proportionate number of voting delegates based on your membership. So those people that are in the attendance that are already designated by their chapters as delegates have gotten their own specific links for voting purposes, so we can more efficiently tabulate the results. We don't expect hopefully any major controversy on any of the delegate action, but this is the ability for the delegates to chime in and provide input and affirmation, if you will. Process-wise, a couple of things to walk through. We'll turn that over to your treasurer in a moment. Under the bylaws, the chapter delegates do have effectively ratification, if you will, of FLiCRA's state operating budget. Your FLiCRA state board certainly is a governing board, and it's effectively presenting a recommended budget to you for consideration, which your treasurer is going to explain that, and we could take some questions in the chat around that before there's any voting. Then we will transition to David Bear as your nominations committee chair. This year, as it relates to terms of office, we had one at-large seat open, which you have one candidate that's being presented for consideration, and he will address the delegates as well. And then we'll have the delegates use the survey link that's been sent out by the FLiCRA State Office to register in on those two items. That is all we have at this time on that. If there's logistical questions, once we have those, we'll answer those. And Madam President, I'll turn it over if you want to introduce your treasurer to introduce a 2022 budget proposal.
Yes, Jim, please, would you address that with us and walk us through?
I'm Jim Jandro, the treasurer, and I will present to you the first item to which you, the delegates, will vote on. And that is the state operating budget for FLiCRA. It is a proposal at this time. It was recommended by the board unanimously yesterday. Before I start, I want to talk about the budget that was sent to you yesterday. There is, for transparency purposes, which I believe the word is so overused, but I must tell you, there was a $10 error on the budget column of 2022. There was $10 too much identified in income, and thus, of course, guess what? It reduces our net income by also $10. So for that, we shall move on. This is my sixth proposed annual operating budget that I created for the FLiCRA Board of Directors and Delegates for approval. I thank the delegates who voted for me at this meeting 6 years ago and re-elected me at this meeting 3 years ago. It has been my greatest honor to work for you all. I also want to thank the past president, Pat Aarons, who asked me to be your treasurer almost 6 years ago. And each year thereafter, you and the current president, Ms. Diane Dulcimer, have continued to ask me to perform that role. You, as my personal and professional friend, from the bottom of my heart, best of luck. Enjoy these 2 years plus more. To the past and current board of directors and your spouses, both personal and professional, I cannot tell you how much I have appreciated your thoughts, prayers, professional and personal support. Those are truly immeasurable. Ms. Lauren Asbell, for you and your analytical support, plus more that you have given me over the years, you've saved me. And of course, Mr. Bennett Napier, the man on the white stallion. Bennett, I cannot express to you how so very much you have been the linchpin to my job. Our relationship has been so critical in this job performance. We have always been so open on all issues, developing actions that were always unanimously approved by the board of directors. The first succession plan, the revised and updated letter of agreement, first ever board of directors evaluation system of you and PIAM since the budding relationship of the two elements 30 years, almost 30 years ago. 30 years ago in February. And the additional incentive clause that we put in as part of the evaluation performance system. And of course, the processes and analytics to help us all better analyze and project financials. Bennett, I cannot thank you and your staff enough and your leadership for your outstanding support that you have given to me and of course to the organization. In looking at the 2022 annual budget, Bennett and I have had several strategic and tactical discussions. We have looked back at 2021, the COVID pandemic. 2021 did not respond to our projections. Why? Because we still continued with COVID, and for me personally, infected by the Delta variant, and well, guess what? The plus side is that I get more antibodies for protection. Yeah. But anyway, when we talk about a budget, the main thing in the budget is always the assumptions that we have utilized, which become the basis for our projections. Many of the 2021 assumptions were moved into 2022. Why? Because we were thinking at the time, a year ago, that we were going to be coming out of COVID this year. No, it didn't happen, of course. It actually got worse. We do have the assumption, though, that we think that things will begin to relax at the end of first quarter 2022. Because of that, travel and visitation by the staff and the board will start on the low end and then expand throughout the year. We also believe that printing and mailing is based on the 2021 experience, which is less than previous years due to the local printing that the chapters are doing, electronic delivery, etc. We believe that the impact of the 2022 legislative session will be minimal. We'll continue to move net assets to reserve. We expect membership to increase by 1% and solicit all of the delegate support to help us. The increased U.S. Postal Service rates have been accommodated. While there are many variances, both in numbers and percentages, we always look at these numbers to determine what should we do for 2022. We are changing our website support to cloud-based support. This year, we have combined two elements and expect in the future that we will have a single entry of cloud-based support and not website support. Why are we going to the cloud? Well, it will provide us increased security and greater efficiencies. Our desire is to help, based on these assumptions, to give you a better understanding of the budget and to be able to ask appropriate questions. I know that these assumptions may appear cumbersome and detailed, but they help us understand the considerations that were utilized when Bennett and I had these tactical and strategic discussions for 2022. With that, I turn it back over to you all to later ask questions and then vote on the budget. That concludes my presentation, Madam President.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any questions, either from the board or from the general population watching? Hearing none, seeing none, I'll accept a motion to accept this budget. Ray? Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, David. All in favor? Everybody vote, please. Delegates who have your forms to fill out, please make your vote about the budget. Yay or nay? And now, David Bear, would you please?
Madam President, if I can,
Yes.
just real quick, I know we've got time, but I just will answer it just so it's live answer
Yes,
on
please.
this one. There was a question posed. What is the dues increase amount? I just, as your treasurer pointed out, just want to clarify there is no dues increase. So that when Mr. Jandro mentioned a 1%, he was talking about an increase in gross revenue based on membership growth. So there is no dues increase. Just for historical purposes, when the board and the delegates met at Fleet Landing several years ago, that had been the first dues increase in a few years, and it was effectively proposed in the sense that hopefully that would put the association in a position for about 10 years, takes us to 2030, barring anything unusual happening, that we would have to do another dues increase.
Thank you very much, Bennett, for clarifying that. And I hope that helps those who had the question. Thank you. So David, would you please introduce our nominee and proceed with the interview? You're muted, David.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you.
Your nominating committee members, Pat Birdsall, Fred Faulkner, and I met via Zoom in August. We were unanimous in our decision and very pleased to recommend Michael R. League as the candidate for our soon-to-be vacant director-at-large seat. Mike is a resident of the estates at Carpenters in Lakeland. His qualifications are included in the package for this meeting. To summarize them briefly, Mike has been a member of FLiCRA for over 8 years. He's been very active in his local chapter. He's held all the offices, and when he was president in 2017, he hosted the FLiCRA annual meeting. Also, Michael has been active in the Estates at Carpenters Resident Association, been the president there, and before that, Mike had a very impressive career in government service, including 15 years as the director of the Office of Physical Plant Services for the Smithsonian Institute. Based on his track record and what we learned about him in the interview, our committee feels certain that Mike will be an excellent member for our state board. And Mike, I guess I don't see you, but I'm assuming you're there. We would like you to answer the following 3 questions. 1, why are you interested in serving as a FLiCRA state board member? 2, what background or experiences with FLiCRA or other not-for-profit organizations do you have that will assist you in your service as a FLiCRA state board member? And 3, in your opinion, what should FLiCRA focus? What should our focus be during the next several years? Michael?
Okay, hopefully I'm not the world's greatest computer person, so hopefully I'm unmuted and you can hear me. Why am I interested in serving on the FLiCRA State Board? As David said, I've been a member of FLiCRA for 8 years. Basically here at the local chapter level, have held every position. During that time, I've attended almost every state and district meeting, and I've got to know a little bit of the people personally and dealing with them. I personally think at times it's good that we get new membership on the board. We bring new ideas and skills to the state board periodically. In order for the state board, I think, to continue its mission, new members and new blood need to step forward. And as I said, at almost 83 years old, I'm not sure I meet the new blood criteria. However, I think the time was right, or is right, for me to apply my time and talents to the work of the state board level. What background and experiences that will assist me in my service? As David said, I have extensive experience on the local chapter, both FLiCRA and the Resident Association Board here at the Estates of Carpenters for the last 8 years. I also spent 2 years serving as the resident directors, represent one of the representatives to our governing board. Unfortunately, it's a non-voting position, but at least we were able to make some of our ideas known at their basic meetings. Prior to even coming to the Estates of Carpenters, I spent 15 years on the board of directors at a timeshare location in Ocean City, Maryland, and again, serving as almost every position. And as was mentioned, I spent 35 years with the federal government, rising from a trainee position to a senior level position at the Smithsonian Institution, where I had the responsibility of overseeing a staff of almost 400 employees and a budget of almost $40 million. So all this experience, I think, required me to possess and demonstrate abilities in management, budget, and interpersonal skills at a high level. And I think this background will prove to be an asset as a member at large on the state board. What I think FLiCRA should focus on, it's a little difficult because I haven't been totally involved in following, except for following the information coming out on the quarterly newsletters. But one of the things that I've been involved with quite heavily here at the Estates of Carpenters was recruiting new members. And I have noticed, at least in my opinion, from the reports we get each month, that membership, not significantly, but seems to be in a trend of going down each year. We seem to be losing more members than we're gaining. Part of this, I think, has to do with the type of facility we live in. We're not young people living here, and things happen. But to me, it just demonstrates the importance that we need to continue to get out and recruit new members to keep our membership totals up high. We're all aware that politicians deal with numbers. And I think in order to maintain our influence with our state legislatures, we need to keep those numbers up. I personally believe that it might be time for the state board to, in some way, either subcommittee or something, to take another look at membership and see if we can come up with some decent ideas to pass on to our chapters and regions on ways to continue to recruit new members. Now, I was told to keep this whole thing to 3 minutes, or our vicious Madam President will cut you off. So I don't know whether I've made the 3 minutes or not, but I want to thank you for your time and attention, and also your consideration of me as a candidate on the director at large on the state board of directors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any nominations from the floor? Madam President, I'll hand that back to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Michael, very much for your thoughtful presentation and answers to the questions. And with that, I turn it now to all the people, all the representatives who are watching. You have your assignments who can vote. So please now fill in your ballot to vote to approve Michael League as the an at-large member of our board.
Madam President, I don't know if Mr. Rader has his hand up or just hit that by mistake.
I think that's a Halloween thing in his background there. That's not his hand.
Oh, David.
Okay. Yes, and just to clarify for the delegates, on the delegate survey link, there were 3 issues. One was the minutes, 2022 budget, what's been presented, and then the last element of your 3-question survey link is voting on nomination of Michael League. And all the delegates have that as a survey link. It's very efficient to use. So if you haven't done that, you can go ahead and do that. So we would encourage you to do that. And obviously, once the surveys are completed, probably after the panel or right after the break, then we'll obviously present the results of the votes.
Okay, so people can send their responses in now and they'll begin to be tallied. Is that what's
ma'am.
happening?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you all very, very much. And now it's time for us to look to our program. We're a little bit early, Bennett. So will your panel be available? It's not quite 10 o'clock.
I'm just waiting on a couple of the other panelists to join the call. So let's give them a moment. And as soon as they get on, we will start. I will just make a couple of notations here as it relates to the agenda. Just as a reminder, again, we will have a panel from 10 to 11 or right in that range. Then we will do 11 to 11:30 is regional director reports and hopefully some Q&A there. We'll do an 11:30 to 11:45 just a break. And then effectively you'll come back and then we'll have effectively 30 minutes of open forum. We'll have some pleasantries as it relates to outgoing board members and obviously the installation of the new board at that time. But the majority of the time will be live question and answer. So Ms. Jane, I
Bennett,
think is,
yes.
yes. Yeah, go ahead, Madam President.
Yes, Sally, you have something you want to say?
I'm unsure how to vote. Do I log off this call and go to my this and vote? I don't know how to vote.
Okay.
I know I have the sample ballot, but how do I vote while staying engaged in the meeting?
You could probably, if you want to do that during the break, you could do that as well. So if people don't want to log off, obviously, if you only have one ability to not check your email link, you could do that during the break time. And so people have that survey link. You could go to that at that point in time.
Okay, thank you.
While we have a few minutes, I wanted to address Michael's suggestion about encouraging membership, which is an ongoing challenge, and we really will need to have some conversations about that. But I neglected to say earlier, and I wanted to remind everybody watching, there's a very fine video that was put together last year about FLiCRA. And if your chapter has not viewed that, I encourage you to have an opportunity to view the video, show it to non-members to help educate them and encourage them to join. That's one method we can use, we already have available.
Very good. And I do think we're getting everybody on the panel. I think I'm waiting on Gary Hennis to join. I think should be here shortly. Give me just a second here. Make sure we've got him. Okay, give me just a second. There we go. Okay, Madam President and board members, what I would recommend, just for visualization purposes is for the next hour or, until we say otherwise, maybe you could turn your cameras off. Wouldn't want you to log off the meeting, obviously, but just turn your cameras off. That way the attendees just see the panelist. That would be helpful. And obviously we'll come back right after the panel for that. So we'll let them do that first. And what we would ask is, if you're not speaking, obviously, during the next hour, then obviously would encourage you to put mute on just for mitigate any background noise. All right, and I do need Ramsey and Ray Neff to come back because they're panelists. So we'll give them a minute to put their cameras back on. All right, we'll get them back on in just a second here. give Mr. Geyer just a moment.
Where'd my camera go again?
Yep, you're okay. You're good, Mr. Neff. You're all set. While Ramsey's coming on with his camera, let me go ahead and introduce. It's about 9:59, so we're about a minute early, which is good. Gives us a little bit more time. So I'm just going to give some introductions. We'll go into more detail, once we go into topic number one. But just primarily want to give some context to, the creation of this panel. As most of you within FLiCRA, if you read our e-newsletters or certainly our resident connection newsletter, you've seen very often, kind of our connection, if you will, and very collaborative relationship with Leading Age Florida. It takes different forms depending on what's going on, either to us or around us as providers and residents. And for many years, we've had the opportunity to have, in some cases, joint task forces between the two associations. And so in anticipation of this meeting, clearly the last year and a half, residents, providers have certainly been, maybe not physically brought closer together, obviously, because of protocols, but certainly just from a communication standpoint, in terms of the challenges on a daily basis that all of us have faced. There's much stronger connection and interdependence, if you will. So during the course of this summer, we had the opportunity to interact with Leading Age on a number of topics, and it kind of led to discussion to create a panel of this nature to really talk about best practices. This is an opportunity for residents across the state. Like I said, we've got several hundred residents participating today, a number in auditoriums, or at their homes, and about 50 continuing care retirement communities represented from Pensacola to Miami and everything in between. So we have 2 residents and 2 representatives of the provider community. As our marketing went out, shared that Steve Bamer, the CEO of Leading Age Florida, was going to be a kind of a co-moderator with me. He's kind of fallen under the weather. And so we're glad to have Mary Ellen Early. I've worked with Mary Ellen Early for 30 years, and she's been in this field much longer than that. And as both FLiCRA and Leading Age know, she's probably the most knowledgeable person about continuing care, in the entire state, to be honest. And so she's going to be the co-moderator. So what we're going to do is alternate topics, and each panelist will have an opportunity to present their own kind of perspectives and either both what they see at their own communities and or what they see in the big picture. And then we will also move into, they'll close with a crystal ball. What's the next 3 to 4 years look like? And during the course of discussions, if you have a question, I know somebody's raised their hand already, but if you have a question, use the chat function. What we'll try to do is answer those at the end, as we want the panelists to be able to get through their material and discussion points. And then if there's a question that we are not able to answer live, what we've committed to do between FLiCRA and Leading Age, we will compile the questions. We will circulate the questions to the panelists, and FLiCRA and Leading Age will effectively write written answers to those questions. And then our goal is to create effectively a downloadable document that attendees can have after the meeting, which captures both those that were answered live and then any that we weren't able to get to just from a time element. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ellen Early, my counterpart, and she's going to open us up with topic number 1.
Thank you, Bennett. And thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I bring you greetings and best wishes from Steve Boehner, our CEO, who, as Bennett said, is not feeling well, home with an illness. If Steve were here, he would tell you how much we appreciate the longstanding relationship that we've had with FLiCRA. As Bennett said, I've been familiar with this association and worked with this association and Bennett for over 30 years. I can't say enough good things about Bennett. He represents you wonderfully, and he's a great professional to have on your team. Together, we've accomplished a lot over the years, and hopefully we'll continue to do that in the years to come. I'm pleased to introduce our 2 panelists. Joel Anderson is the immediate past president of Leading Age Florida. He's the CEO of Lifestar Living and the past chair of the Governor's Continuing Care Advisory Council. Gary Hennis is the COO, Chief Operating Officer of Westminster Communities of Florida, which owns and manages 10 CCRCs. Gary is the chair-elect of Leading Age Florida. So our first topic today is best practices around resident engagement in budget and finance matters. So we're going to start with Joel and then Ray and Gary and Ramsey. So we have an alternate with provider resident. So Joel?
Okay, good morning, everyone. And I echo what Mary Ellen said. It's always a pleasure to be able to work with FLiCRA. I've worked with at every community that I've had in Florida. I've been very actively involved with FLiCRA and just feel like it provides a great balance of structure and being able to operate quality senior living communities. So in connection to this question, I actually put together some fundamentals of best practices as it relates to the budget and the finance and how communications roll. So I'm going to share 4 key suggestions. And I would say first is the leadership and the resident council or the group of residents that may not have a council should establish some method of routine communications. So there's a formal method of communications as it relates to budget and finance, and that there's an understanding that goes in perpetuity year over year, month over month, or quarter over quarter. I do suggest that you consider establishing a subcommittee of the resident council that's focused purely on budget and finance, and use that subcommittee with financially minded residents who have backgrounds in accounting, CPAs, financial or business acumen to understand GAAP financials and all the various non-cash and cash components of the financial statements. Honestly, I'd use those subcommittees as liaisons back to the resident committees in various buildings or neighborhoods, or even with the greater resident body, to be able to discuss the financials so they can better understand that from a resident's perspective. As you all know, and you've heard it many times, if you've seen one CCRC, you've seen one CCRC. How it's structured organizationally and how it operates, including the entrance fee contracts, services included, healthcare discounts, the entrance fees and monthly service fees. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces, and there's never anything that can be looked in isolation. So there's 3 pieces of a financial statements. That's the income statement, the balance sheet, and obviously the statement of cash flows. All 3 of those are critical component statements to any financials. The other thing I would just mention is discussion of budget and the ongoing forecast for changes in monthly maintenance fees should be perpetual as part of the quarterly or the resident council meetings being held with the residents. You can talk about factors that are driving in relation to the core South Region CPI or other areas that may be affecting that. And then obviously the last thing is ensuring that residents have the opportunity to meet with the CFO or financial services director at the communities. I do recommend that each of the business offices maintain audits and financial statements available for residents to be able to obtain and review, and maybe even consider placing those in the resident library so they don't have to come and ask from the business office. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Ray. Would you like to continue?
Yes, I totally support what Joe has put on the table, and I expect that the residents' governing body documents contain the several needed committees, including a finance committee with a very specific charge. This charge needs to include the core elements of the financials as well as the capital budget. It is also important that the residents' governing body to have a great relationship with the FLiCRA chapter to be sure that issues outside the walls of the CCRC are known and understood. When does the review start? It starts the day after the budget is approved, which is at least 60 days prior to the next fiscal year or any time the fees are adjusted. Also, the end of the cycle is still ongoing when the budgeting process begins for the next fiscal year. Your Residents Association review is ongoing, but frequently the process is more focused internally with the various departments, and the cycle ends with the approval of the budget for the next year, a meeting with the director or finance committee of the residents, and then a communication to every resident. Thank you.
Gary?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Hennis. I'm the COO of Westminster Communities of Florida, and I just would like to echo, Joel gave a great summary and wonderful overview of processes. What I would add, as our organization is a multi-site, we encourage all resident councils to have a finance committee. I will share that while there are 10 life plan communities amongst Westminster Communities of Florida, not every community does have a finance committee. And actually, Ramsey Geyer is chair of the finance committee at the campus where he lives. We do similar processes in the overview of what Joel Anderson had shared, but from a best practice perspective, it is the importance to have that communication with the resident council as well as the finance chair every year, reviewing budget materials, leading up to planning of the budget, and assumptions get shared with residents of each of the various communities. They have input into that through regional meetings with each of the communities. That final budget is reviewed and approved with residents in attendance. Our CFO also goes to each of the communities and presents the budgets and ongoing financial information when requested by each of the councils. Same holds true with capital budgets. We work with all of our resident councils to identify key projects that they would like on their campus. We also encourage redevelopment committees, which can be members of the resident council or finance committee, but also of interested individuals that are appointed to help identify plans for expansion. So that the residents have input into that. There's also a process in which we solicit information from all residents from financial matters as well as capital budget items that get hopefully incorporated into those budgets. But the key piece for us, I would say, in our CFO, who's been with Westminster Communities of Florida for going on 30 years, is that he has personal relationships with those finance committees and will go work with the finance committees, always available to both resident council members as well as the finance committee members, and it attends annually out in the field.
Ramsey, would you like to conclude the discussion on this topic?
Well, I could just say ditto and be done with it, but I won't do that. All of those comments are exceptionally on target. My experience has been, and again, I'm in a obligated group which has 10 member communities, all working for the same provider. Our primary link to the corporate entity is the ED, the executive director of our community. When we established our finance committee, it was given initial responsibility to report annually on the finances of the corporation to satisfy the residents that we were financially stable, well managed, and focused on the right things for the residents. Over the period of time that we've been doing this, it became apparent that we also needed to have a better understanding of the local finances for our community at Westminster Communities on Julington Creek. So we meet quarterly with the executive director and go over the quarterly information that he provides in addition to the reports we get that go to OIR. That quarterly information helps us have an understanding of where we are in the real world. The annual review is typically done later in the year after the year has closed and all the financials are done. Our CFO comes in, is willing to meet with us, and he is exceptionally well-versed at being able to take the complexities of the CCRC finances and make it understandable for residents. He's very patient and understanding, and I think Leading Age gave him an award for that effect, which is great. Building relationships with the provider and the provider officers is another key to a community being comfortable with where they are. Sharing the budget. We have quarterly association meetings, and at each one of those, we request that the ED provide us information relative to the finances and operations of our CCRC. Communications is key. Residents can take one piece of information and fly off with it and maybe not totally correct. So it needs to have support from different directions so that they feel comfortable. At the end of the year, when our CFO comes and presents the financial overview to the residents, that in conjunction with the report that the Finance Committee does, gives them a clear picture of where we are. But again, you've got to have a good relationship with the local management and the provider management. From that standpoint, I think we've pretty well covered it.
Thank you. Joel, I think, had one quick comment to make.
Yes, Mary Ellen, I just mentioned, I mean, some of this, what I think is added as best practices are things that have tried to be able to maintain that routine communication that goes beyond just what's in statute. So we have 651-081, which talks about the resident council president being involved with the governing body and those required communications. The second thing is I think is what Ramsey also mentioned, when you have issues that are going on with the finances or the budget that you have questions, having some venues such as fireside chats just break down and go on in relation to one particular topic, whether it's capital expenditures or it's culinary and dining or labor costs, those kinds of things will just help mend and help everybody understand the importance of the business decisions to maintain the quality attributes of the community.
I think we have one more comment for Gary, and then we have to move on to the next topic.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. One other key item that I would share is that is part of the finance process, of course, is the annual audit. And that annual audit is presented to all resident council chairs, as well as available in print in each resident community library, as well as a presentation to the Finance Committee itself if it is, if they desire. That concludes.
Very good. Thank you. And just as a reminder for the attendees, we are cataloging, if you know, some of you have sent me some chat questions. We're cataloging that for the panel. So when we get to the Q&A portion, I'll do it in chronological order as they've been submitted. Topic number 2, I mean, certainly that this one's going to segue nicely from the budget discussion, is the issue of best practices to overcome or mitigate supply chain challenges. You've seen, obviously, you know, whether it's, you know, materials early on in the pandemic, the, you know, PPE equipment, stuff like that, and now certainly supply chain challenges encompass labor challenges, which, you know, at the beginning of this meeting this morning, we talked about legislation that may be coming forward on staffing ratios and skilled nursing and stuff like that because of workforce shortages. So a good question to the panel. You know, every sector of the you know, economy is facing workforce challenges. Long-term care is, I'd say, getting more than its fair share. And so providers and communities are having to be very creative of, you know, how do you manage that and still deliver value to residents So we're going to kind of go back in reverse order and start with Ramsey, and we'll end with Joel. So.
Thank you. Obviously, this has been one of the most challenging years, I think, in the history of our organizations. One of the biggest challenges has been obtaining and retaining employees. And one of the biggest things that has had to happen is to have to raise salary levels in order to be competitive. And that gets to be kind of an ongoing thing, because A raises salary, B raises salary a little higher, and it just keeps trying to escalate. The other thing that has impacted situation is that due to the stress and impact of COVID, many people who've worked in certainly the medical aspect of the operation have decided to make a career change and have moved on to other things, which is making the available workforce much smaller and much more difficult to maintain the staffing that we need. One of the things that I think the operations have to look at very closely is work-life balance. We've talked about that for 50 years of how to maintain work-life balance. And for the most part, it's been up to the individual to figure out how to do that. But I think as we move into this more trying times, the organizations are going to have to help with programs to help improve employee work-life balance, to help them feel the value of their contribution and the desire to continue in that aspect, as far as giving them value and appreciation, showing the appreciation for what they contribute and how hard they're working. So there are many different things that are being, I think, done across the industry to try to accomplish that, but that's, I think, going to be the crux of trying to get around some of the issues that are facing us. The other thing is the increased use of technology. We see more and more advertisements of robots serving meals in restaurants and robots doing other things. And that's all well and good, but we still need the face-to-face personal contact in order to keep a team going in the same direction. And teamwork and everyone working for the common goal is the optimal efficiency of our organization. So I would say the primary thing is to be aware of what the needs are and develop programs to focus on that.
Great, thank you. Gary?
Sure. I think it's fair to say that this is probably the most challenging situation that we've had in our industry ever. I've been in the field for 35 years, and other than the nursing crisis of the 90s, I've never seen anything like this. Between the COVID and the new ongoing supply chain issues, and while labor clearly is the biggest, there's also other supply chains issues. I would say the first that we experienced at Westminster had to do with PPE during the first year of COVID. And we utilized all of our resources to make additional inroads and contacts using our group purchasing organization to help us with that. But labor remains an ongoing, consistent issue, not only in senior living, obviously, but throughout all businesses. I attended the Leading Age National Conference last week, in which many restaurants, and it was held in Atlanta, many restaurants were closed, other businesses were not open. The hotel had minimal staff and no housekeeping services. So while clearly healthcare is impacted, I would say it is a national crisis at this point. And what is the solution? For us, it's about being competitive. It's not only doing the environmental scans of healthcare, but also all the other service industry, making sure that we're competitive as from wages as well as benefits. We've done a culture survey as well as questionnaires for job satisfaction, all of our team members. And it's just not a single issue to solve. Clearly, until individuals come back into the workforce, I don't think we'll see much change. It's also fair to say that we are competing. We always have competed for nurses and nursing assistants with others, and including acute care institutions. The acute care institutions find themselves in the same situation with having to employ traveling nurses at a very high rate of pay. And ultimately, that does affect operations. And financially, it impacts operations of the organization. So, while it's an ongoing challenge, I know that we're all trying to work together to understand how to have an advantage to be more enticing for team members to come work, future team members to work for our organizations.
Very good. Ray and Joel, we're going to close with you, and just be mindful, if we can, just want to make sure maybe 2 to 3 minutes each as we go through the topics, just because we'll make sure we've got some Q&A time at the end. So Mr. Neff.
First, let me applaud management of the CCRCs and the residents for their understanding of the need to clearly recognize how important the individuals are that are carrying out the minute-by-minute tasks, which seem like an endless list. There are 2 ways to deal with issues. One is called positive KETA, one is called negative KETA. And the first 3 initials stand for kick in the, and then the last item is the anatomy. And you can figure out ways to get much done by both of those methods. One of the airlines recently didn't anticipate the outcome of their impact on their labor force with so many refusing to get shots, thus needed to reverse this mandate to stay in business. And yes, lots of tough decisions need to be made. Very interesting, though, how good the CCRCs reacted to this unfortunate situation by eliminating the mass gatherings at mealtime, finding ways to deliver meals, ways to come up with alternative methods of technology, et cetera. And oh, by the way, as someone mentioned earlier, our dear president talked about Zoom communications. Believe it or not, one of the industries that benefited the most was the plastic surgeons and the people doing the neck tucks. So many of us have finally spent time looking at ourselves, which we never did before Zoom meetings. Thank you.
Joel?
Yeah, I'm just going to hone in on, I think Gary gave a good overview, and what Ray and Ramsey have also added to the comments. I'll focus purely on the labor component of this, knowing that about 55 to 60% of operating expenses are related to the labor. But what we really need to understand is happy employees translate to happy residents. And so to attract and retain employees, I would be asking these questions to your leadership, and helping them support them, because how the employee experience goes beyond just the employer. It goes around the entire environment of how residents and everyone is engaged with those employees, which means that we can't expect employees to be perfect. We have to give them the space, especially young workers, entry-level employees, to be able to make mistakes and be able to help foster and educate them to become a better worker and not expect them to be perfectionists. We are definitely dealing with the use of flexible scheduling, job sharing, on-the-job training. Because of the workforce shortages, you can't place somebody, into a job shadowing position for long periods of time. They have to learn on the job, which means that server may not be as good as the seasoned server, in your dining room that you've experienced, over the last couple of years. Those are kinds of things that we have to be able to absorb. The other thing is market study analysis. And I would just say, if we as an employer are not trying to target at least the 60th percentile of the median wages for entry-level employees in our local area, you're not going to be able to get good quality workers to be able to retain. Fringe benefits such as helping with childcare, to free employee meals, wellness care, as Ramsey had mentioned, we're talking about work-life balance and other attributes that be able to create a long-term employee. So what I would ask and certainly emphasize is that when you all look at your mission statements, look at the mission statement and it not be just about the residents. It's about the holistic experience that you want to create and foster as a culture of your organization, which means the employees need to be a core component of that mission statement, not just serving the mission, but being part of the mission because you are trying to reciprocate value back to them for a long-term employee experience. Thanks.
Our next topic is CCRC expansions. There's a lot of activity in this area, so our panelists will talk about that. We'll start with Gary, followed by Ramsey, Joel, and Ray. Gary?
Hello, everyone. Ongoing expansions, obviously, we know one of the key barriers for expansion into our state is OIR and the amount of regulations. But in spite of that, there has been numerous expansions throughout the state of Florida. A lot within the for-profit environment as well as the not-for-profit. Most of the not-for-profit typically have been in adding additional lines of service, as well as I would call satellite campuses, expanding of the IL environments. I think going forward, we'll see ongoing expansions into other services beyond the bricks and mortar into continuing services through the continuum beyond the regular continuum that we have. So within Westminster, our expansions have been in the areas of independent living, mainly resizing our skilled nursing facilities, as well as expansions into standalone memory care institutions.
Okay, Ramsey?
Okay. I agree with, of course, everything that Gary said. I think when you look at the industry, depending on the geography, you will see more expansion of existing communities than you will see new CCRC communities. And part of that has to do with how investors think and how quickly they can get their money out of the investment they're going into. But the expansion of an existing community is based on the recognized need of the residents. Maybe they need a larger dining facility. Maybe they recognize that they need a more focused assisted living facility, these kinds of things. Bottom line, when you're looking at what drives the decision for expansion, like I said, from an investor standpoint, it's return on investment. I'm going to put my money in, but I want to get money out, and how fast can I do that? From the provider's perspective, it's additional occupancy, which means growth and development. And I'd also like to second what Gary said about expanding other services. When we get into the next topic and we talk about our crystal balls, we're going to be looking at what we think future residents are going to be looking for based on what they see already. And I think that's a key important element. Just as an aside, I learned the other day that when the state of Alaska was brought into the US, they made a very conscious effort to make sure that the indigenous people owned the land that they've been living on all these years. When the US expanded, the American Indians had no such benefit. So the Alaskans learned from history what they needed to do for the future. And I think residents that are coming in are learning from what they see today as to what they're going to be asking for. So we'll see more of that in the next topic. But I think primarily expansion should be for the benefit, like Joel said, not only for the provider, but also for the resident.
Thank you, Joel. I would like to remind everybody that there are 71 CCRCs in Florida. Joel?
All right, thank you. I think, just in the evolution of the CCRC, and I think that one of the challenges as a leader of several, organizations, whether it's single site or a system CCRC, a responsibility is to be able to advance the mission of the organization. And so I've never been the kind of person that looked at ourselves as leaders of the CCRC and saying, I've been brought here as a leader and executive to be the caretaker of the community. Our responsibility is to advance the community, to make sure it stays relevant to its mission as things continue to evolve in our field. And that's what we see. So it takes a lot of disciplined approach to deal with expansion. Expansion is a much safer approach in growing as a CCRC organization versus new greenfield projects and startup projects. The thing that you really need to think about as it relates to the disciplined approach is making sure that you've got a great market position already, and how do you maintain that as the continuing growth needs evolve for older adults demographic, and avoiding the risk of losing your competitive advantage, because people are doing market studies all the time in your area. They know what the demand for senior living is, and somebody's going to step in and do it if you don't. And how do you maintain that competitive edge as a community long-term is very important. And that is also difficult whenever you deal with existing residents who say, listen, we don't want any growth, we don't want any construction, we just want to enjoy things like they are, versus us as leaders of the property are responsible to make sure that economic, fiscal, responsibility to the organization is maintained. And so it's a big responsibility of boards and the leadership to figure out how to make an ongoing change for not just the current residents, but for the future demand.
Thank you. Ray, would you like to conclude?
Yes. First, as Mary Ellen Early said, the number of the CCRCs has stayed reasonably constant over the years, and the growth is either obviously increasing that or it's doing something other than in the number of CCRCs. The interesting trend that I see in Sarasota is that of the newer organizations, they get started without an independent living facility. And they have bought the property to deal with an independent living facility when they conclude that the demographics is such that now there's a sufficient need for them to create the necessary, if you will, supply. And I think obviously what's growing, what's the primary accelerator of everything that's happening is the good old demographics and seeing the number of us folks that have the pleasure of getting older year after year. Thank you.
Very good. Ideally, what we'll do on the next is, as there's our crystal ball section, is maybe each panelist maybe stick around 2 minutes if you can. That will give us, we've got about a good number of questions. I want to get to as many as we can at the closing. So on the crystal ball, I'm going to go really random order here and start with Ramsey, and then we'll do Joel, Ray, and then end up with Gary on the crystal ball.
Thank you. The crystal ball is an interesting thing to look at and to say, well, that would be really cool. And then you look back and say, well, I didn't get it right, but we try to do the best we can. Indications are that future residents will expect more independent living, more than beautiful communities and amenities. The residents are the most important part and will expect more in-home services, certainly in independent living. And they would expect to see more in-home services, nurse case manager services. nurses on duty 24/7, assisted living like services in the home. A lot of this is, when you think about it from a provider standpoint, is a heavy burden. And like I said, being part of an obligated group is a different relationship than an independent provider. And I see a lot of independent providers around the state of Florida that are sometimes struggling to make it through the year, let alone come up with new programs to satisfy the current, if you will, whim of the residents. But that's part of where we need to go. And I really think providers need to think like 70 and 80 and 90-year-olds and not 60-year-olds, because person-centered care will be based on the need of the resident, not the unit they occupy. Simply because they live in an independent unit does not mean they are still independent. If they've been there 10 or 15 years, their capabilities have changed drastically. But because the CCRC model never created specific deliverables for independent living, a lot of things are not part of the program. So my crystal ball says new residents coming in are going to be expecting more things than we are providing today. And obviously we can't get anything done immediately, but over time we need to develop, how do we get from A to B? How do we deliver these services? Because as Gary said earlier, if we don't figure out how to do that, somebody else will figure out how to do it. And we'd really like to keep, much like Joel said, keep our mission focused on the needs of the residents that we're supporting, and not just trying to keep the ship going in the right direction.
Right. Joel?
Yeah, I would just, my crystal ball probably says, obviously the pandemic has created an impact similar to maybe what like a Great Depression or the bubonic plague or Spanish flu or something like that would have caused. So people are not going to forget this, anytime soon. So I expect that current and future residents will want to know more about policies and approaches to feel safe, because what we're doing is we're selling peace of mind every day to our residents. And we want them to know that they can be safer in a communal setting with us than they can be individually at a home by themselves without really a plan in the event that they need future health care. So I think that we're going to be very focused on including additional health and infection prevention measures, which includes continuing health screening to continue to happen within healthcare. I think that you're going to see introduction of a lot of environmental safety technologies and other approaches that will be able to help keep people wellness care. I know, Gary and his group introduced some things over the pandemic with telemedicine, and those partnerships are going to be very important. What I expect on the design side would be that more pocket neighborhoods will be created for independent living to be able to reduce the scale of congregate setting, and allowing vertical access to the amenities to improve walkability for older adults to be able to enjoy those amenities. I do expect the contracts to change with the potential introduction of an in-home care model, providing certain provisions of in-home support while you stay in independent living. I see the healthcare moving to household models, like the small house concept or greenhouse model concept that you heard a lot about. Less emphasis on memory care support. I see programs shifting to accommodate common aging challenges and avoiding a negative connotation for those who have Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. You can see that potentially that there could be no skilled nursing in potentially future projects, or you're going to see a reduced scale in skilled nursing overall as campuses reposition themselves. And probably the last thing, you should expect existing CCRCs to make substantial investments who will face extreme competition from the for-profits particularly.
Mr. Neff?
Well, it's obvious from what we've heard from Ramsey, Joel, and I'm sure Gary, that we don't share the thoughts of Charles Duell when in 1899 he was a commissioner of the United States Patent Office, and he suggested his job be abolished, and he stated everything that can be invented has already been invented. And during the most recent 50 years, electric car, cell phone, GPS, DNA testing, 3D printing, and much more. I actually believe that the biggest competitor of our industry right now is aging in place, and it's what people will do with their own homes. And therefore, I think we have to figure out the plan to deal with that competition. And I'm very familiar of an organization called Caring Transitions. And Caring, I can tell you that if you know anything, as most of us do on this phone call, people accumulate a lot of stuff. And I think that people are going to find ways to bring more and more of their stuff with them. You would be surprised if you haven't checked recently at the way there are areas up on your ceiling where you can store things that you didn't even imagine existed before. There are unit structures right now where furniture is stored on the ceiling, and you can change the setting within the existing space that exists and so on. I see lots of stuff. I see dealing with clutter. I see that one of the biggest benefits of a CCRC is so many of the people are going to come from older communities, and they will not have the entertainment centers and all of the other convenient facilities nearby. So I think that what we do is have a leg up on them by finding ways to take advantage of things. Energy efficient, you got to deal with the delivery system. So I'm telling anybody from what I know, you better have a place for the delivery drones can land and a delivery system to get packages directly to the living units. Thank you.
Very good. Gary?
So the crystal ball, it's some days it's difficult to see through this COVID fog, what the world will be. But I will say with the age wave and the demographics significantly shifting with the baby boomers really coming of age and to come into potentially into our products, what we will see is additional pressure on some will not want what is currently being provided. And I'll just support some of the items that Joel was saying. I think that our traditional CCRC will look very different going forward. I think what we'll see is population management will be a key topic that gets discussed at multiple levels, from a managed care environment, different types of home and community-based services that refers back to what Ray is saying. In senior living, we know that the individual's home has always been what we are competing against, and that's that general inertia to move, as we've been in homes for 20 years or longer, that it's really tough to think about giving up that home. But I think going forward, that's going to continue to be the issue, because there will be more community, home and community-based services for those individuals that still want to be maintained at home. But the traditional CCRC, I think, will have more IL, some assisted living. If there is skilled nursing at all, it will be much smaller, and it will not look like what it does today. I think it will probably be more reflective of a current assisted living environment, but is able to handle all the clinical needs that will be necessary, but will probably be a smaller portion of that community. Because of the population and managed care services for individuals that will be at home. I think there will also be additional concierge services, technology for individuals in the home to be able to stay in place that we can probably even envision today. So it's probably going to be an exciting time. It's probably going to be like when the Model T was created, and those concepts that were foreign to those Americans at the time are probably going to be foreign to us, especially for those of us that have been working in the field for so long.
Very good. Thank you. We're going to transition to Q&A, and then Mary Ellen and I will close right after the Q&A. I'm going to present 3 questions because they're interrelated. These were the ones that came in chronologically, but they're all interrelated. One of them may not get to great detail, but the first question is, kind of explain the designated representative in 651-085. We've talked a lot about budget and finance, but there's a question about the designated representative and where that individual falls into play. Going back to the Budget and Finance Committee, there's a question on, if you don't have one, what's the best way to start one, and what's an optimal number of members on the committee? There also the third interrelated question, not limited to finance per se, but it's certainly interrelated, is a number of communities in Florida have voluntarily integrated either voting or non-voting residents on the provider governing board. Where does that come into play on finances? So those are 3 interrelated on the finance topic. Maybe if we could just tackle those kind of briefly. And then there's a couple other subject matters that came in the Q&A, but those were all kind of interrelated. Anybody like to start?
Yeah, I'll do this in tandem with hopefully with Ramsey. I think as far as a finance committee, where's that responsibility lie? I think either it can be independent at the desire of the resident council, or it should be a responsibility of the resident council. I think Ramsey can really speak to what has happened on his campus as far as the creation of a finance committee.
I agree with Gary, and I think it's important to recognize, in my mind, having a vote on the provider's board of directors is not as important as having a representative presenting issues and concerns to the board for consideration. I think that's a far more important issue. In our case, when we created the finance committee, it was not an easy task because the board that was in place at that time, the council, did not want a financial committee. They didn't think they needed it. And being very hard-headed, I didn't agree, and we kept pushing and we got it. As far as how to start it, first of all, the council has to agree that they need a financial committee, and they need to identify, like it was said earlier, people who are qualified to analyze a financial statement and make some logical conclusions. The number on the committee is really up to the chair of the committee. My feeling has always been the number should be an odd number. I don't like having committees that have an even number of members because you can get deadlocked. So, we have 9 members on our committee, and it's a special committee, not an open committee. At times, we will invite the community to sit in during our meetings, but a lot of our meetings are closed meetings for obvious reasons while we discuss issues, so we can prepare a logical presentation for the residents.
Can I just go back to the panel on kind of the first component of questions? And I appreciate the narrative on the committee. I mean, do each of you within your communities have a designated representative, and is that person generally, if you have a finance committee, on that committee as well, or is that kind of separate?
I'll just mention just real briefly, I've had both experiences where there's been a formal committee that was set up versus having to start one from scratch. And so what really I've seen from resident councils is like, oh my gosh, another committee or another meeting, because it's the 20% that carries 100% of the load, oftentimes from a resident council. And as you all know, you're trying to enjoy your retirement years, not have a full-time job again. And so we created an ad hoc committee of the resident committee, resident council, and appointed people who were actually financial backgrounds just to start getting the committee routine communications, as I mentioned earlier, in going through that process of being informed more about financials, budgets, and the process. And then, as I've mentioned before, they also serve as liaisons back to the resident, floors or the neighborhoods that they represent to be able to share updates. The thing as it relates to the designation of a representative, I think is broadly gives the resident council or the resident body the opportunity to be able to appoint the person that's most qualified to be able to understand the financial and accounting background. Sometimes the resident council president falls into that designated representative and the responsibilities of the resident council president. But that doesn't keep like a resident council's treasurer serving as that designated representative to participate in that process. Even though that there are, so you've got a component of 651.085 as it relates to communications that are happening as part of the quarterly meetings and in collaboration with the president or chair of the resident council. And then if I'm not mistaken, it's 651.081 as it gets into other responsibilities involving the resident council president. So if you have a designee other than the resident council president, you need to help the community make sure that they're dotting I's and crossing T's, because the OIR is going to be looking for those compliance statements that the resident body was involved in those communications.
Yeah, in my case, the council chair is a designated representative to the provider's board. And all issues from the community follow that channel from that standpoint. The council chair is a ex officio member of all committees, but certainly of the finance committee, and attends those committee meetings with the CFO and the committee when it meets.
Well, I'm sure I'm older than Mary Ellen. She's got more experience, but when I read the history, I think one of the mistakes is having the title of a given member on the residence council be the automatic representative. That's not the way the big boards are filled, and that's not the way, in my opinion, that you get the best representative on some of those other elements. The other thought I would make is that, as has been mentioned, the challenge is to be sure that you don't just do what the regulator requires as a minimum, because that's not doing anything that puts you in a preferred or a provided or going above and beyond. So just to work together, find the best way to deal with the situation at the moment. I think that's the best way to set things up such that you have that continuous communication and that continuous respect for each other.
Like I said, we're not going to get to all questions today, but I've cataloged them. We're going to circulate them to Leading Age, and between Leading Age Florida and FLiCRA, we'll answer them. I do want to move to one more topic within the crystal ball. This was one of the questions, but you kind of addressed this, a couple of you as panelists. Is the industry moving away from attracting healthy residents to providing more services in the independent living part of the community? Gary, I think you talked a lot about that in your crystal ball. Maybe let's close with that, and then Marilyn and I will close. There's been a very great conversation. So anybody want to tackle that just as a follow-up?
I'll take a stab at it. And, the challenge with any community is allowing for aging in place. And as we allow residents the ability to age in place, and we know that at times individuals become compromised, and the support systems that are necessary for those individuals, there's always that balance between sales and marketing and aging in place. So not always easy to maneuver through that, because you want to respect and honor the resident in their agreement, but that's our commitment. The commitment then comes to all new residents entering in. While you would think all individuals would look at that as a positive sign, the marketing side of that isn't always as encouraging to those new individuals coming in. So I think The younger the community, you see individuals come in waves and they age in waves. So then, there's that normal cycle of life. And I think it will always be an ongoing challenge. Joel?
So I don't think that you're going to see some big dynamic change with retirees coming into CCRCs at the current age. I mean, we're looking 79 to 81 as our averages. People are just going to continue. Doesn't mean that people age, that they're aging any healthier than what they were necessarily 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. It's just that they're living longer and they've got other elements and other things, which really puts the onus on us to be able to figure out how to be able to support that in a CCRC environment. And as you all know, a newer property, you're going to have these vibrant, younger residents that come in, but as a property matures over time, you've now got second and third generation residents that are part of new generation residents coming in. And as Gary mentioned, balancing that from a sales and marketing perspective, but also supporting an aging in place environment is the constant challenge that we deal with. It's almost like I've heard the story of residents saying, listen, if they need a walker, they shouldn't be in the independent living dining room. Or if they need a wheelchair. And I would always say, it's all fine and good until you need one. And so my point is that we need to foster a culture in our CCRCs that respects and honors aging, and that we can be able to do that, not with just our employees, but as a resident population, because we are a supportive and caring environment to do so. And I really believe that's what makes the difference and the value proposition of CCRCs so well respected. So hope that answers the question.
Great. We're right at the anointed hour, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Just Mary Ellen, you and I can certainly close. Just certainly on behalf of FLiCRA, just grateful for Joel and Gary and Mary Ellen participating in Leading Age Florida, our collaborative relationship. So Mary Ellen, I'll let you close, and then I'll come back and bring us back to our housekeeping for a transition back to our membership meeting.
Thank you again for allowing us to participate on the panel. Great job by our panelists and also the folks who asked questions. I found the fourth topic to be especially interesting. I can tell you that I have been getting more calls than ever from members asking about flexibility to do more things. And I will tell you that the problem does not lie in 651. It's in other sections of statute where more regulation would be required if you did do more in independent living. So I think as to associations, that's something we might want to look at in the future. But I leave this meeting with a renewed enthusiasm for life plan communities and also the kinds of things that we can do together as two forward-thinking associations. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you. You are welcome to stay on if you want to hear kind of some other topics we have for our membership and delegates. Just again, grateful for the collaboration. I thought this was fantastic. So like I said, we'll circulate those questions we didn't get to between the two associations and create a little kind of document. And the ones that were answered live, I'll write in the narrative kind of and send out to the panelists for sign off, but capture kind of their essence of how they responded to the other questions as well. So we're going to transition. So Lauren's going to help me transition, get our board members back on video. And then once we get that, then I'll turn it over back to your president and we'll get back on starting with our regional reports from our 8 regional directors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So those of you watching at home or in the auditorium, just give us a minute to allow us to get everybody back on screen here. Just take a minute.
Bennett, everybody, while folks are coming back online, I would just like to express my appreciation for this valuable conversation. We have noticed in the past couple of years an increased collaboration with Leading Age, between FLiCRA and Leading Age, and how we've been able to resolve some of our questions and our issues in a collaborative way. I think having this opportunity to see spokesmen from Leading Age interact with our representatives was very enlightening and very reassuring. And I appreciate, Bennett, all you have done in recent years to make this possible.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. It's, you know, I think just the connection is important. I think we've always had the conversations amongst the two organizations, you know, amongst our leadership boards. We may not agree on every issue in terms of the solution, but we definitely have the ability to create better solutions if we work together. So that's, we're grateful for that. That's because not every state has that. We've had some bumpy roads, but that's because the issues are complex. But the ability just to be able to talk most of the time, that's going to end up in a better place for all of us. So I thought it was a great panel. So we've got a few other folks calling, getting on camera, and then we'll start. So. Just making sure. Let's see, we've got. Just making sure who we're missing on the screen here. There. Ray Neff will be back on, I'm sure. Oh, there he is. Yep. Okay, and David Rader. Okay. Madam President, we do have a quorum. If you want to just, we didn't adjourn technically, but if you want to reconvene, I can, before we get into regional reports, I can definitely give us the data from the survey links from the delegates, because those have been completed. So Lauren pulled the survey links. Again, as a reminder, we had 3 issues. Approval of the 2020 minutes, the state operating budget proposal, and then obviously the election consideration of Michael League. There were no write-in candidates on the ballots. All of the ballots required to have a majority vote of the chapters voting delegates have come forward, and all 3 items have been approved. So at the appropriate time, we'll do an installation of Michael League before we close today. But at this time, if you would like to convene and start back with the regional reports, we can do so.
Thank you, Bennett. And that's exactly what we'll do. So let us start. I don't think we have a report from Region 1 because Charlotte's not here. So we'll go right to Region 2. Ramsey?
Thank you. I'll be brief. Region 2 encompasses 6 communities: Fleet Landing, Penny Farms, Westminster Woods, Westminster St. Augustine, Cypress Village, and Vickers Landing. They're all, as someone said earlier, unique communities, and they all have similar issues and consistent issues. For the most part, most of the communities are opening up as a result of the lower infection rate of COVID, and we hope this will continue, and eventually will go into history and we won't be dealing with it anymore. However, I think most of the communities recognized that lessons learned from the last year and a half are not going away. They will be continued to be implemented into the future. Many of the communities, Cypress Village specifically, are intently focusing on the use of technology, very involved with IN2L, which is a innovative program to assist residents who are not really computer literate, but able to use this device to communicate with their families and other necessities. And I think that's going to be important because in some cases where a resident has not been computer literate, and we have only about 2/3 of our community of 500 residents are computer literate and even have a computer. So to be able to have a device earlier on that they can use as they age is a big advantage. So there's some good things going on, and sharing of ideas is a key part of our success.
Thank you, Ramsey. Richard Greatwood, Region 3.
Yes, the expansion of the Mayflower is quite extensive. It has gone extremely well. We have a new 4-story medical building. I can turn in my chair and look at all the work that's going on at the present time, at all the machinery that's circulating. We expect that to top out in November. Occupancy is expected in October of 2022. Simultaneously, work is underway for 5 residential independent living towers. In addition, a separate fitness center that will give us 2 and a brand new clubhouse. So we are looking forward to continued sales, and the market appears to be good. Village on the Green is in Region 3, and Gene Walker, chapter president, reports that the activities are starting slowly. They have begun to have dining entertainment, and she is, I think, repeating what many of us know already, that during the pandemic, it was difficult to get people to volunteer within associations. So they're working on that as well. We have no report from John Knox Village in Orange City, but they are also expanding, so we expect a report from them soon. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you, Richard. Very good. So Pat Birdsall, Region 4. Unmute yourself, please, Pat.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
All the communities in my district have had their shots. We have Devonshire, Indian River Estates East and West, La Posada, Sandhill Cove, V at Lakeside, and the Waterford. Generally, masks are still required indoors at most communities. And also most of the FLiCRA people appear before the resident council on a monthly basis to keep FLiCRA's name forward and to advise the general population of what's going on. Some communities only still operate with 2 or 3 people, but they do have a focus on membership and have kept up their membership. There's fewer COVID cases. And also, Indian River Estates West has implemented an email system where we keep the general population apprised of what's going on. It's to be used for call to action, but also as a means of communication between FLiCRA and the general population. So that's all I have.
Very good. Thanks, Pat. Region 5, David Baer.
Thank you, Madam President. Region 5, I think the story in most of the chapters are pretty typical from what we've heard throughout this presentation this morning. Following the vaccine mandate, the staffing problems have varied from mild to significant at some CCRCs. And most of our CCRCs are gradually moving toward more in-person meetings and social gatherings. There are a couple of things that have happened that I think are noteworthy. First off, the FLiCRA chapters at St. Andrews North and South are combining. Those 2 CCRCs are co-located. I know they're going to end up with a very strong chapter that'll by uniting, they'll be even more capable of providing and looking out for the welfare and ensuring the quality of life for their residents. So thank you, buddy. Also, one thing in the report that I'd like some folks to take a look at, John Scarborough, who's the president of East Ridge Village chapter in Cutler Bay, and this has to do with membership. When talking about his residents in assisted living, he was surprised to learn, he encountered some headwinds, was surprised to learn that how few of them handle their own affairs and their finances. And what he said is, I do not send the quarterly bulletin to family members or financial fiduciaries. I'd be interested in knowing how this is done elsewhere. Frankly, this is something I had not heard of or thought of before. If you have any ideas on that, either get in touch with me and I'll pass them on to John, or whatever you think. But it might be something for us to consider in our future discussions on membership. That's really all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Region 7, Ray Neff?
Region 6, Madam President.
I'm sorry, did I skip one? Sally Jane, I did it again. I'm sorry, Sally Jane.
It's because you don't think I have a last name. Nobody ever does. In relation to David Bayer's thought, our chapter is planning a program later this month because COVID has made us very aware that so many of our residents in independent living and elsewhere are alone during COVID. So we're planning a program on guardianship, and we have people coming in to explain what that might mean. My only other comment, because you can read my report, I think we're forgetting to thank the staffs here, and I'm especially aware of how our activities coordinator kept us engaged mentally when we were going crazy otherwise. And we also appreciate marketing. In spite of the last 2 years, our marketing department keeps recruiting new people, and that allows us to recruit new members. I think they are underappreciated. The other thing is, everybody here is so grateful that FLiCRA and Leading Age stepped up back in 2020 when they weren't planning to send the vaccinations to people in independent living, only to the others. But we all got it, and we didn't drive 300 miles across the state to get it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sally. And I will just address your question about appreciating staff. We've had this conversation before, and if you're interested, we can look at it again. Several of the communities have a gift program at the holiday time to residents make donations to give gifts to the employees for the holiday. And this is sometimes a complicated question. So if you are interested, I would be glad to discuss it with you myself, or maybe we can hold another meeting and discuss it further, because yes, Sally, it is important that we thank our staff. So thank you for raising that. Region 7, Ray Neff, please.
Yes, as David said, we've got a lot of similarities, and so I'm going to just say double it. I mean, when you look at what we do and all the activity that is going on and having a meeting like this, everybody should be very, very proud of FLiCRA and Leading Age and our activities together. But our voice gets louder as we get bigger, and we're over 12,000 members, but we can be over 13,000 members with just a little more effort by each one of us. And I'm so proud of everybody, and thank you for participating in this meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. David Rader, Region 8.
We've been stuck at 12,000 for quite a while.
Thanks very much. I really have very little to add to my report. Things have been quiet in our district. but I'm similar to everybody else. I thought most of the CCRCs had a holiday fund for their employees, but maybe some do not. If you do not, you should have one. So I concur in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we'll take a little break. I have 11:19 on my clock. Do you want to reconvene, what, 11:35 or something?
I would say 11, let's aim for 11:30, assuming we'll start at 11:35. That actually
Yeah.
will give us more time for open Q&A. So don't log out if people want to just mute yourselves. You don't have to log off the meeting. You can just leave it live and come back. We'll go off screen for a few moments and come back. Aim for 11:30, but we'll start no later than 11:35.
I know we're not quite ready to begin, but I'm seeing your happy faces, those of you who are here. Some of us have gotten something to eat or drink in the interim, and I'm feeling very guilty because I didn't make enough coffee for everybody. And I know next time we're in person, we will have something to share. So come back.
Soon, Diane.
David Rader, do you have cream with that?
OCAM provided coffee and my wife provided donuts this morning. So we've done well here at OCAMIC this morning.
But you didn't bring some for everybody.
I did. I say here, I'm serving. Put your tongue out. Let's go.
I want some cream with mine.
Good job, David.
PM. Just waiting on a couple other folks, Madam President, to come back.
Yeah, sure.
What time do you?
Mr. Neff sharing Halloween candy.
We generally have a supply in case one of our neighbors stops by, but this year we had the lights out, so I could keep all this for ourselves.
Well, I had a neighbor that did reverse trick or treating, came to the house with a big bag of candy and a big jug of wine.
That's a good neighbor.
I don't know when the last time was this happened, but there was a period when here at John Knox Village in Pompano Beach on Halloween, the staff would dress up and go around from unit to unit and deliver candy. It didn't happen this year.
They dressed up and they.
Well, we had a great Halloween party here with costumes and everything.
We did our own. That's true. That's true.
Jackie and I got dressed up as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
You won a prize.
Yeah, we did. And I was just so afraid that she would fall down because she was the jelly, and I was afraid she'd go fall in the jelly and ruin the whole thing. But it was fun.
It was very cute.
We'll have to post that at the next board meeting.
So, Madam President, we're waiting on Jim Jandro and Sally Jane to come back before we convene. And for the next items of business, we definitely need both of them present. So,
indeed.
I'm here.
we just can't see you.
She's invisible.
We see your camera.
That's my Halloween costume.
Oh, invisible.
That's my Halloween
She's
costume.
invisible.
Okay, I'm here.
All right.
My administrative assistant is showing up in the background, but other than that.
So, Madam President, you do have full board back for reconvening.
Okay, so do we want to recognize the outgoing directors first, Bennett?
Yes, ma'am. Happy to do that. And just I'll transition also to announcement of officers as well. So outgoing directors, you heard this morning, Jim Jandro has fulfilled 6 years on the FLiCRA board. So they're under our bylaws. We do have 2 consecutive terms are the term limits, if you will. We have folks that have come back, certainly if they've sat out an election cycle from time to time. And but we do have term limits to allow for, just transitions and things of that nature. So Jim Jandro is coming off the board after completion of 2 consecutive terms. That is he is in an at-large seat. So obviously that's the seat that was open relative to Michael League's ballot and placement. And then we have Sally Jane is Region 6 Director. That is an elected, our 8 regional directors are elected by the chapters within their region. Sally Jane, based on personal needs, will be coming off the board at the conclusion of today's meeting. That is a region. I know we have got a number of communities from Region 6, which is Southwest Florida, that are present. We would love to be able to find a resident in Region 6 that's willing to serve on this board. We meet usually at least once a year in person and then the rest virtually. But staff would work in conjunction with someone. And if there is a nominee from that region, we would effectively convene the chapters presidents in that region to elect an appointee to fulfill the unexpired term of Sally Jane. So she is coming off at the conclusion of today's meeting. And then we had, as your president mentioned at the beginning, Tom Gregory, Westminster Suncoast, was elected as an at-large director. He, because of personal reasons, has come off this board. And you see, probably to many of you, a familiar face. Hugh Strawn is from St. Andrews and Boca Raton, who had come off the board as well. But when a person, an at-large director, there's a vacancy, the board is able to appoint someone to fill the unexpired term that's been, created. So the board recently voted to have Hugh fulfill the unexpired term vacated by Mr. Gregory, who served up until effectively earlier this week. So just want to give that just one, thank Mr. Gregory, Mr. Jandro, and Mrs. Jane for their work. Typically at this meeting, we'll obviously be presenting some type of memento to them personally. They will be receiving one, and that we'll probably hopefully do that either at their communities at some point. We can do it in person, but today we're doing it virtually just to give them appreciation for their leadership to this board and to our membership. And they'll be getting their board appreciation plaques shortly after this meeting. So I don't know if
may, Bennett,
yes.
I would just like to express appreciation from the board to the members who've served so well, even if a shortened term. We really appreciated Sally being part of it. Jim, again, thank you so much for your years of service. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate all you have done. And welcome to Michael. We look forward to working with you as a new member of the board. It's an effective board. We've been very successful. I know we'll continue to be so. Thank you. Welcome, Hugh.
Thank you. So as it relates to the ballots, we mentioned prior to the break, we had all the necessary chapters that needed to vote to get a quorum of the chapter delegates. Again, it's a proportional voting based on the more members you have, the more votes you get. So all 3 items were approved, which includes obviously the election of Michael League. So under the state bylaws, the board of directors has authority to elect its own officers. And so we'd like to announce that to you as our membership today, and then we'll install the board, and then we'll go into open Q&A. You have, as a membership, had certainly the privilege, I would say, and it's certainly an honor to work with her. Diane Dulcimer, she will be term limited off the board at the fall of next year. So she actually has 1 more year on the board. She is willing and able to continue to serve as your state president. I think all of us certainly that work with her closely know that she's done a phenomenal job. And her timing was probably not the greatest the last year and a half. She probably rethought that decision, but she handled it beautifully and kept us very focused as necessary. So Diane Dulcimer will continue to serve as your president. Vice president role, regional directors can serve as officers except for the president role. Ramsey Geyer is also a Region 2 director, will continue as vice president. Treasurer, replacing the great efforts of Jim Jandro and continuing his legacy there, will be Hugh Strawn. And then Charlotte Cummings, as Diane Dulcimer mentioned today, she's attending a friend's funeral. She will continue as secretary. She's from Westminster Oaks here in Tallahassee. Under precedent, the board has deemed it appropriate to have a 5th member of the executive committee. Just to, again, Ramsey talked about this during the panel. Always nice to have an odd number. And so
Is
Pat
that
Birds-
because we're odd people, Bennett?
No comment, Madam President. So, but Pat Birdsall will be the 5th member of the executive committee. So we're glad to have all of them. So we will circulate a new board roster that'll be published on the FLiCRA website. You'll see that certainly in the next resident connection. And just grateful for all of the leaders that have been willing to serve this board. So at this time, Madam President, I'll just virtually ask the board at the appropriate time to please, when I call upon you to raise your right hand, please do so. So just, yes, please. Yes, sir.
Just a quick point. When you send out that new list of officers, would you include, like you did last year, their term?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Absolutely. Thank you, sir. So it gives me great pleasure as your executive director to install the new board. You stand on the threshold of a new year for the board of the Florida Life Care Residents Association. You've been elected by your fellow members to help guide the organization to new levels of service. This vote of confidence in your ability and dedication is also a vote of thanks. With gratitude for your willingness to commit your time and energy for the betterment of all FLiCRA members. If you're prepared for these duties, please raise your right hands. Just making sure. All right. Do you sincerely promise that you will administer your office on the board of the directors to the best of your ability and judgment? And answer the affirmative.
Yes, I do.
That you will act in conformity with the state bylaws.
We will.
And that you will uphold and support the mission of the Florida Life Care Residents Association.
I will.
Congratulations to each of you on your new position with the Board of Directors of the Florida Life Care Residents Association, and we're grateful for your willingness to serve. I know we had 2 questions raised in the chat, so let me, give a context for the CCRCs that you represent. So we'll make sure that within the board roster you will have where each board member resides. I can do that fairly quickly before we get into the Q&A. And so I'll not just kind of top down in terms of video screen. Ray Neff is from Plymouth Harbor and Sarasota. Ramsey Geyer is from Westminster Woods, Julington Creek. Chet Janes is Regency Oaks, Clearwater. David Rader is at the Lamar Miller, as we would know it, Oak Hammock chapter in Gainesville. David Baer is John Knox Village, Pompano Beach. Richard Greatwood is the Mayflower and Winter Park. Michael League, as you heard earlier, is the Estates at Carpenters in Lakeland. Coming off the board, Jim Jandro, Cypress Village, Jacksonville. Pat Birdsall, Indian River Estates West, Vera Beach. As you know, Diane Dulcimer, also John Knox Village, Pompano. Houston is St. Andrews, now the combined chapter, North and South, Boca Raton. And Charlotte Cummings, as I mentioned, is Westminster Oaks, and Tallahassee is not able to be present with us today. Don't think I missed anybody. So hopefully that was helpful for the group. Let me see if there's one more Q&A here. So, all right, very good. So at this stage, Madam President, Lauren, I don't know if you can help from an administrative standpoint. We'll open it up for some live Q&A for the remainder of the time. I will go back before we begin into the open Q&A just a little bit more clearly on the legislative front. And obviously, if there are kind of follow-up questions that didn't get addressed by the panel, you have at least 2 of the 4 panelists are still present. So you can certainly follow up with some additional details there. I thought the panel discussion was really fruitful, and hopefully something we could do more often with Leading Age Florida and just having, again, the different perspectives. Before we get into that, I'm going to just give you a few frames of reference. Some of this will be in your next Resident Connection newsletter, and we'll make sure that you'll have this so that you can follow it. So I'll kind of lead in with where I started this morning. The legislature starts in January and will conclude 60 days after that. There is obviously a special session that's been called That's obviously primarily on COVID-related matters, as we've seen in the media. Going into more specific items for you to be aware of, I'm not going to go into great detail on any one of them, but just want to give you some bills. I know many of you do try to look at different pieces of legislation as they go through the process. So I'll just give you some bill numbers for reference. I mentioned this morning that there will be some further discussion of either modifying or extending COVID-19 liability protections for general business, which may include healthcare providers. One of the primary bills, just like it was last year, is House Bill 75. That's something that you may want to follow, or if you're following in newspapers, those types of things. House Bill 75 is probably the primary vehicle that's going to address that. A couple of other ones that I would mention that I mentioned this morning, Senate Bill 362, and then I want to give you the House counterpart is, bear with me here, don't have that one, don't have the House counterpart listed, but that is related to ad valorem taxation at nonprofit homes for the aged, which I mentioned this morning. It's effectively a one-page bill at this stage, but our goal is to kind of monitor what happens with it, and in the sense of would any amendments be again filed during session that might potentially be problematic for preservation of that tax exemption for continuing care retirement communities. There's another couple other ones that we'll be following, because there'll probably be some other things that added to it. Senate Bill 414 and House Bill 209. This is one, there was some discussion by the panel on in-home care and things of that nature, private duty nurses. So there is actually those two bills are related to what's called a family caregiver certified nursing assistant program. So some modifications there. As I mentioned this morning at the beginning of the meeting, there is a coalition of healthcare organizations, owner-operators of healthcare, communities or facilities, if you will, that will be making some proposals to the legislature on modifications to, staffing ratios, especially in skilled nursing, at least for the short term. With the workforce challenges you heard the panel talk about, the concern is, will providers have the ability to even meet the minimum staffing requirements given the workforce shortages? And under Florida law, there are penalties if they don't. And so there has to be some conversation of, if maybe at no fault of their own, if they fall below the ratios, what happens, and things of that nature. There's definitely going to be also on the other side of the equation a proposal to enhance the revenue, if you will, allocated in the state budget for nursing home reimbursements through the Medicaid program, primarily for freestanding nursing homes, because that's the majority of residents in freestanding skilled nursing are Medicaid eligible residents, where it's generally a smaller percentage in continuing care retirement communities, usually in the 5 to 10% range in most CCRCs, but still, certainly important to the equation. One thing that was posed this morning in the context of the panel was, resident engagement in terms of financial issues or governance issues. FLiCRA has continued to kind of at the board level have conversations on, under Florida Statute 651 as it stands right now, and this was passed in 2015. There's provisions by which it illustrates, there's an encouragement for owner operators to have residents on their board of directors. It is voluntary under Florida law right now. We continue to, effectively update the data of the 71 continuing care retirement communities. There is an increasing number of communities and/or, either owner operators or management companies in some cases, where they have voluntarily added residents to their governing boards. And as President Daltzman mentioned, Cypress Cove down in Fort Myers is the most recent one to do it voluntarily, where Rita McSherry actually was elected as new resident to their board. So we are incrementally getting more Florida communities to add a resident or residents to their board in that sense. And, you know, that effectively, from a political standpoint, we, you know, don't believe, you know, from a FLiCRA standpoint, that it's politically feasible to achieve a mandate in Florida law, at least in 2022. There are states that have passed it into law, and you know, that includes California, New Jersey, and a couple others. California is the one that we have primarily looked at. We've definitely had conversations with Leading Age Florida on that topic, and you know, so that I think that will at some point continue to be a key topic for FLiCRA and Leading Age to look at, but it won't happen in 2022 based on what we know right now. So with that, I'm gonna open it up for Q&A. I guess what I would ask is within the best aspect for if you have questions you want to pose to the group or staff, certainly to do that in the chat function. If you can raise your hand, because then we can more easily identify where you're coming from. And I will start with Marilyn asking, she asked a question, so I'm going to ask her to actually clarify it. You know, I think the question is the CCRCs within the region. Maybe that was what her question was. Is that the question, Ms. Askin? So I can answer that. Okay, all right. Yes, and we're gonna go to live and let her, and Lauren, if you want to unmute so we can have live Q&A.
Unmute, or I'm unmuting. Yes, I was curious as to which CCRCs in their area they represented it, and not necessarily from the CCRC where they lived.
Understood. We do have a document, Lauren, correct me, I can't remember if it's on the website, but we do have a document we can share with members and delegates that the 8 regions that we have a document that breaks down, you know, where each community falls into what region. Those of you that are, you know, in a membership role in your chapters, when you get the monthly summary reports from the state office, that actually has the regional breakdown. And so geographically within, now it's not on the CCRC map that you got as delegates, but, you know, just to give perspective, the regions are drawn and have been drawn for quite a while. We've had a few modifications over the years. I'll give an example of Region 1, you know, is the smallest region in terms of number, only because of how the state's laid out. So Pensacola to Tallahassee effectively is Region 1, and there's only 2 chapters in that region. Doesn't mean Regional Director Charlotte Cummings is not doing a good job. She's batting 100%. You know, or not, that's not a baseball analogy. I screwed that one up, but you know my point. So there's 2 communities in that region because there's only 2 CCRCs in Region 1. When we get further, but you know, Orlando South, where the largest concentration of communities are, Region 7, 6, 5, and 4. The majority are in those areas. Certainly Region 2, Ramsey Geyer mentioned there's a good number in the Jacksonville, Northeast Florida area. So we will make sure it is on, I think there's a document on the website. If not, we'll put that back there and give you that breakdown. But those, again, those of you that are membership roles, you can see that each month on the summary reports where those regional breakdowns are.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Again, if you've got open Q&A, please raise your hand and then we can unmute you and have dialogue with the group and get some interaction here. Mickey Castor, Lauren. See here. Give us just a minute. Lauren, it looks like Mickey Castor might have dropped off. Yep, there she is. Okay. There you go. Ms. Castor, I think if you'll unmute, we can go live. Ms. Castor, I don't know if you want to put your question in chat or you can
Okay,
ask it live. There we go.
all right. And this is not a question, but you all have been here for University Village through our years and years of travail. And now our new CEO, Michael Brown, and you all had a state meeting here over at our Villas Clubhouse, but Michael Brown wants to invite all of you to our VIP reception, which will be held on December the 9th. That's a Thursday from 5 to 7:30, where we will present the new, improved, totally renovated, no longer University Village. It is now Unison, UNISEN, Senior Living. And we're not quite there yet in terms of the renovations. We've got another month, but it will be ready for December the 9th. And any of you, especially Ray, as our region director, we would love to have any of you who are close enough would like to come. You will be receiving an invitation. All board members will receive an invitation. And we would like for you to be part of our new start. We already have been marketing, and lots of folks are coming into the villas, which were redone first. And we now have people moving into the main towers. So, and one will not be done yet, but we are converting a floor in our east tower to an internal ALF. And, but those of you who've been through it know that the regulatory hurdles that you have to jump are pretty high. So we're looking at an April opening of that. But I wanted to share our good news with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs.
Nikki, thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Bennett. Thank you so much for sharing that today. And you are right, there are a lot of us who have been following your adventures and are very happy to know that you've made such progress there, and that we wish you continued success in the future, a happy, healthy community. And those of us who can join you, I'm sure will do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Diane, I'd like to give a recommendation to the culinary service, that organization. It was excellent when we were there, and congratulations on your Project Lazarus.
Thank you. Thank you.
We did have one question. We'll give a little levity to today's proceedings for Pat Birdsall. So everybody's asking, is that a real backdrop? It is actually a Zoom background that you can all download, but she's not, I don't believe she's in a tropical location, but we certainly would probably want to be there with her if she was. With that, we've got another Lauren hand raised, and there's a lag time between when Lauren unmutes somebody, so we'll just give them a moment to get unmuted, and then they can ask their question. And if you can give your name, if you're not named based on how you put on your Zoom profile, if you can announce where you're from, that will be helpful.
Chuck Schneider from Indian River Estates. Can you guys hear? We have no idea.
Yes, sir.
Just wondering if you've ever gotten together and said, do we need any statutes passed regarding pandemics or what has just gone on? There were most of the stuff at Indian River Estates I thought was handled very well. There are a couple of things that seem to me they need an epidemiologist, not a GP looking at. But I was wondering if you folks had ever gotten together and said, are there any statutes that would help us through the next time? Because unfortunately, it may not be another 100 years before we face something like this. So just wondering if folks had taken a look at it.
Mr. Schneider, just to follow up to your question, it's certainly a good topic, obvious reasons. Do you have, does your group of residents, do you have some specific areas of focus that you're asking whether they've been looked at? It is that related to,
yeah,
dining?
Honestly, some of the things that were put in place would have discouraged somebody with chest pain from getting into the ER very quickly, because you got 2 weeks of time out. You were forced to isolate. Another thing that happened was that once things were open to visitors, they had a very strange thing here where they made the visitors stay in a motel and come and go in and out of the facility, which frankly made no epidemiological, I can't pronounce the word, sense at all. So there's just a couple of items that I wondered about.
One thing, certainly. One thing we could do is, at least on the visitation component, is recirculate. There was a governor's task force on, visitation that met last, well, it seems like yesterday, but it wasn't, but obviously during 2020, and that went through August of 2020 as things developed. And that obviously related to, long-term care communities, including your skilled nursing assisted living. And as you mentioned, like affected independent living and guests coming in there. So what I think, at this stage, there are a couple of pieces of legislation outside of the liability issue that have been filed related to, the pandemic and, communicable diseases going forward. So I expect there may be some type of additional narrative in the statute created to at least give some guidelines to some of the issues. But I think they would use the previous governor's task force as the foundation to start from in terms of protocols. But we'll make sure that may be still on our links and resources on our website, because there was a pretty extensive report that they submitted to the legislature, and we'll make sure that each of you have that at least for reference, because that will probably be the starting point of anything that they do add going forward.
This is Ramsey. I just wanted to add, my conversations with various agencies throughout the state of Florida, they all, for instance, the Department of Emergency Management has looked very closely at their protocols and their procedures and have updated when and how fast and how they react to a perceived and or real emergency. So I think that's been a good outcome of the issues of the pandemic. And I think they've done things to try to make sure they're more proactive than reactive.
Ramsey, a question for you from me. Is this a subject that could come up at the Governor's Council?
Probably not. One of the questions that will come at the Governor's Council will be more focused on the kinds of complaints that have been logged with the OIR. The OIR has no control over what agencies do or do not do.
Yes, and that's a good segue, Madam President. Just I was going to mention this, but we will be circulating by our e-newsletter an announcement that the Governor's Continuing Care Advisory Council meets November 17th. I think it starts at 8:30 to about 12 range. It may not go that full length, but you have 3 members of FLiCRA that are on that council: Ramsey Geyer, Ray Neff, and John Dosmer. Ramsey is the council chair currently. That is a public meeting. It will be virtual again, so people can register to attend that meeting or even listen by audio. So we'll circulate that. So any residents that want to listen into that effectively will encompass kind of a state of the union of the CCRC market in Florida from the Office of Insurance Regulation. So we'll give a pretty good data trends, if you will, coming out of the pandemic. So encourage you to consider that if your schedule allows. There is a question that was posed that I'll answer live, this question is one that we get pretty frequently at the FLiCRA headquarters is, are CCRCs covered entities under civil rights laws, Americans with Disabilities Act, that type of thing? What I would say is I think that's one of the auditoriums that asked that question. So if there's a designee that wants to be more specific, what we would share is, generally speaking, CCRCs fall under the Fair Housing Act. And a lot of the questions come into play on, as you've talked or heard from the panels this morning, what are the conditions by which, criteria by which somebody can be mobile, moving into a community, and then what are the issues related to motorized carts or scooters as people transition, walkers, those types of things. So you do fall into the Fair Housing Act, and there are some very specific guidelines in terms of, that providers have to follow. So what we typically will do is there's a number of good sources that publish pretty detailed guides on fair housing as it relates to senior living. Those are guides that we're happy to send out with, electronically too. And we do that pretty typically for resident councils that are asking those questions as you see either your community, aging in place and the demographics of your community change, or as was mentioned this morning, maybe more, less mobile people moving in. How are those decisions being made, and what are the parameters by which those decisions can be made? So we'll be happy to send a couple of those resource guides to the folks who are asking down at St. Andrews. This is a good opportunity. So you have, within the time allotted, we want as many live questions as possible. So if just raise your hand and we'll unmute you so we can ask live questions. Okay, there's a question as it relates to Jim Jandro. Maybe Mr. Jandro and I can tackle it. There's a question on automatic dues. So we need Eileen Nichols. Lauren, if you could unmute her to ask that more detailed.
Okay, Jim, can you hear me? You're muted.
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay, Jim, you said early on that you thought the automatic dues would go into effect, that you were hoping that they would go into effect, and I wondered how you came up with that. Did you mean at your community or Florida-wide? Because we still don't have that at Lakeport Square in Leesburg.
Let me explain or qualify what I said as part of my discussion. The automated dues chapters, we expect those dues to come in, and then what happens is that the community is delayed in submitting their dues, and the inability, of course, since we don't have them, to make the deposit. So that's the delay that I was talking about. Now, to your specific question as it pertains to getting automated dues, let me talk to you from a perspective here at Cypress Village. We do not have automated dues either. And I have gone to the executive director on several occasions, and in turn have also gone up that chain, originally at Brookdale and subsequently to LCS, which is the management community, and gone up the beyond the community. And in both cases, both those chains, they have denied going to automated dues for Cypress Village because of the workload it puts on the the CFO. So we keep trying here to get into the automated dues, because typically if you look at communities that do have automated dues, they will have a higher percentage of the residents that are members of FLiCRA. Bennett, would you add to that? Is there
Sure.
anything to add?
No, I would just say that, you know, it's a long-standing process that's been around since I think mid 90s is when the first chapters went that direction, and it's been, you know, kind of modified over the years. Lauren Asbell, who primarily, obviously, most of you work with on a chapter level, we can work with you in terms of progressing to that model. You know, if management's agreeable to do it from that standpoint. There have been some hybrids like Cypress Village, as Jim mentioned, where it can be done in a different way, where you still have a universal anniversary date, but maybe it's more administered through volunteers, but still potentially getting some of the fruits of that approach, where you get a higher percentage of residents to belong. So we're able to work pretty flexibly with you, given whatever is happening at your own community. What I would share is, you know, I think in terms of FLiCRA chapters, you know, we're well over 50% of our chapters are on that process in some form or fashion now. And so that's, you know, it is a large percentage of our membership are coming in from that pathway. And, you know, it's a couple of things. The pros of that process clearly are there, because our membership concentration in those communities that have it generally are averaging 95% plus market penetration, if you will. That's clearly the pro, for both from a engagement standpoint, but also a revenue standpoint for the state budget. You know, in terms of us being able to not have very frequent dues increases, having some of those communities that have a very high percentage that allows us to do that, to be frank with you. The negative, if there is any, is, you know, even when you have a universal anniversary date, you know, it doesn't mitigate your need to have resident engagement the rest of the year. It's not a one and done, you know, here's your dues invoice and we'll see you next year. That's not going to work. You've got to still have regular programming, obviously COVID aside, programming where you're bringing in speakers like Sally Jane talked about earlier, you know, guardianship presenters or whatever it may be, legislators coming in. You've got to do that to maintain the vibrancy and keep FLiCRA in front of, you know, current and prospect residents. So what I would share is we, you know, over the last couple of years, Mr. League talked about it. We've got some good data in terms of best practices for membership, you know, in terms of what works best. So we've got some downloadable documents and some trends of what works best across the communities. What I would share with you in terms of resources, this kind of off topic, but certainly membership related, we've updated in the last year our legislative handbook for chapters. Once you're able to get back and have live meetings, some of you have already started that. You can use that to help with your programming. That's an updated document. One thing clearly, just in terms of discussions from the panel today, we've updated our CCRC finance guide, which is about 125-page document to help, you know, help guide you through, those of you that have budget and finance committees, kind of some tools to use, or if you're trying to create one from scratch and you don't have one, that's a great place to start. And we're getting, I'd say on a weekly basis, requests for that. I would share this with you, goes back to our budget, is we've seen an increased amount of you know, requests for these documents electronically in lieu of us shipping hard copies out. One, that helps our state budget because we're not paying postage and printing to do that. You're not having to pay a fee to cover that cost, and we can give it to you like within, you know, seconds, depending on when the email comes in. So, and you can circulate it to a much wider audience very, very efficiently. So anything that you might want, and if you have ability to have electronic dissemination of documents, or we're happy to work with you in that sense. So just ask. So Lauren, I think we had earlier, we had one hand raised that's gone down, but I think it was Cyril, I think, was one of our attendees.
Hi, yes, it is a hand raised by me. I'm Cyril Kobe. I live at Freedom Plaza, Sun City Center. And I'm having a hard time kind of articulating my question, but my observation is that we, the residents, are definitely living with and through all the transitions and the challenges you all have mentioned, particularly workforce challenges, supply chain, and costs. And so there are questions that I'm sure I'm going to get from the community about how we, the residents, deal with what we see as changes and reductions, perhaps, in service level. And we're getting comments from folks who have people, for example, in rehab and nursing, that they definitely see it and feel it. And it's not good for the day-to-day attitude of the residents. How to deal with it is a challenge, and it certainly is not good for marketing when the residents are kind of negative about, the lack of service, things decreasing. And we certainly understand costs are going up. We certainly understand, we can't have a server if you can't, if you don't have people to hire. So we understand all of that, but people are not happy when they see things going away. So I'd just be interested in your comments and how FLiCRA can help us, the residents in the CCRC communities, understand how to navigate what we are contractually entitled to and what management needs to communicate to us.
Sure. This has been it. What I would stress is that, your state board has talked about this quite a bit in general, and then this is a statewide issue. It's not limited to one community because the challenges are pretty pervasive. I guess there's more than one way to answer this, in the sense that it's probably not likely, at least at this stage, that there's a legislative solution. Definitely expect the Governor's Continuing Care Advisory Council. They meet in a couple of weeks. That's certainly going to be a discussion point of that group. In terms of, reductions in services or cutbacks in services, whether they're short-term or longer term, a lot of it does come down to twofold. One, what are your contract provisions? And as you heard one CCRC, Joel said it pretty well. You've seen one CCRC, you've seen one CCRC. So you have some communities that might have 1 or 2 contracts, and you might have some communities that have, in some cases, 8 to 10 different contracts, all with different clauses and provisions as it relates to services or certainly cost. So that's an issue. What I can share at the bigger picture level, in advance of the panel that we had this morning, that was clearly a topic in terms of supply chain challenges that we talked about with Leading Edge Florida, not only with the panel, but just from staff to staff. They recognize that, they meaning the providers, owner operators, have to do as best the job they can to communicate, one, what are the challenges they're facing and how does that impact, the delivery of services and contract provisions. And then and what is the time frame by which those are going to either come back to where they were before, or they're permanently going to be affected. That is really, to be frank with you, comes down to the resident council. And if your resident council's not having those conversations on a regular basis with management, that is the place that they need to be held, and keep the feet to the fire, if you will, both hold your resident council accountable and certainly your local management, because that it has to be done locally. It doesn't mean it's going to happen as fast as you want, and it may not come out in the context of exactly what the solution you may want to see is, but that is the vehicle by which you can affect change and have the I would say, appropriate communication. FLiCRA and Leading Age are going to continue to talk about this, to your point that, if the community, the marketplace doesn't figure out how to mitigate some of these challenges, that it will long-term affect the attractiveness of the model to new residents. And so they have to, either have to figure out a way to get back to more of the norm, or have something that replaces it, that enhances the value of the model for current and prospect residents. It's so, status quo is not going to get it. You're going to have to do something differently to deliver that value, or improve communication when these things occur. So I don't know, certainly, I would say certainly for 2022, you're not going to see a legislative solution, because, quite frankly, every day there's new supply chain challenges that are being presented to owner operators. And it's, even if you put a Band-Aid legislatively on it, you're probably going to have to add something, next year too, in 23. So, but I mean, it's not going to go away. And what I can say is, from a top-down standpoint, FLiCRA and Leading Age are going to do as much as they can to share information, what is been done well, meaning efficiently and effectively, to mitigate these things, and try to work through them. But I've made it, your board and staff have talked abundantly clear. It's not limited to one or two providers. It's pervasive in the sense that nobody's immune to these challenges. It's the issue of who's doing best getting through them is the key, and how do we learn from them and replicate that? That's what we're going to need going forward. It's at 12:20. I know we tended to kind of finish about 12:15. I'd say we give maybe time for one or two more questions. Lauren, I'm going to repeat a question from Eileen Nichols. It's primarily to Ramsey Geyer. How are you addressing your technology needs? At Lakeport Square, we're trying to get management to get a volunteer to help residents use their phones and computers. I know Jim Jandro is really instrumental with Cypress Village on that too. So maybe we start with that and maybe do one more question after that. And I'll turn it back over to your president after that.
Bennett, was that question?
Ramsey, it was for you, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. And the question was what we are doing about residents who do not have computer technology. You're muted, Bennett.
Yes, sir. It's effectively what's the best process as it relates to technology and people who are not either computer or iPhone, Galaxy, Android savvy. How do you get a process working to get some training at the local level to get a volunteer to help residents do that integration? In that sense.
Well, one of the problems we have here is technology in general. We put in close to a $50,000 capital budget request to upgrade our auditorium such that we can make current technology type of presentations to the residents, so that a person could walk in with a thumb drive, plug it in, press a button, and it's not only live in that room, but it's also going to be taped so it can be shown later. And my ultimate goal is that it will be live streamed both to the in-channel TV and other opportunities for people who aren't on site. That's a future. What we're doing right now for those third of the population who do not have computer capability and do not have any interest in learning computer capability, we have to do hard copy. So we've been pushing on the executive director to stop sending emails out with pertinent information and then have people go to the dining room and say, oh, I didn't hear that. How did I know about that? Well, because you don't have email. So pushing hard copy is all we can do right now. We do have residents who are willing to work with residents to become more proficient with email and technology. But again, those residents mostly don't want to deal with it. So it's kind of an evolution starting when the residents come in. And one of the things that we're really looking at is IN2L type technology for all residents, regardless of their current capability, so that as they progress through the life plan continuum, they will already know how to use that instrument when they become less capable of using a standard computer. That's kind of what we're doing.
On another note, and it may be a reflection of size of the community, but here at John Knox Village in Pompano, our administration has hooked up with a commercial computer training group who sell their services in public, but they come into John Knox Village and they offer 15 minutes free to any resident, and many times you want it, for advice and support in learning how to use a particular device. And if you need more time or wanted an hour or 2 hours of their time, you pay them some reduced rate for that. And at the moment, it appears that is very successful. David, would you agree? Is that your perception too?
You know, at Cypress Village, what you described.
David's muted, so.
Yes, it's a company called Groovy Tech.
Correct.
They're more than just local, and I think it has been very well received.
Jim, I'm sorry, please, what were you saying?
No, I responded to Ms. Nichols by giving her my phone number and asking her to call me so I can provide more detail to her. But basically what we have done in Cypress Village 2 years ago is that we have followed the corporate model. What I mean by that is that we have established an information technology committee where we have people from management on that chair, co-chairs along with resident. I am the resident co-chair. And the person who designed our Cypress Village app is the management co-chair. And what we do is that we look at information technology from a corporate perspective. For example, you can't add technology unless you've got the background and the network to support it. And that's what management's got to put in. So there are a lot of integrated issues that take place. And then from that point is when you can start implementing things across the community. And I'll stop at that because there's so much more I could say. And
yeah, but talking personally with somebody who has the issue is probably a good idea. Yeah. Hugh, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, thank you, Diane. In the state of Florida, there's an incentive program for high school kids to get community service hours credit. And our activity directors on both sides of the campus work with the public schools. We have a couple of high school kids come over for several hours each week to offer free help to anybody that wants help with their computer. It doesn't do anything for people that don't want the help, however.
Yeah, thank you. That's very useful. And as Bennett said, we've reached the end of our adventure today. I think it's been very successful. I learned a lot. I hope you have too. I welcome again our new additions to the board. And unless there are some other questions or comments you want to make, I'm ready to adjourn. What do you say?
We want to talk about the next meeting, Diane?
I don't know if we create that now, Bennett, no. Little premature. We will get to that, Hugh, and everybody will certainly be involved in the decision. Thank you for asking. Anybody else have a question or comment?
I think we had an excellent meeting, and I think a lot of good information was shared, and hopefully all the chapters that attended will benefit from something they heard.
I agree, and I hope that all who were listening can tell their friends that it will be available. Bennett will be available on the website, correct? So there are lots of issues here people might want to tune into to catch up if they missed the meeting today. Excuse me. Thank you all who participated, all who attended out in the greater world. Thank you, and safe, be healthy. Goodbye.
Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Jimmy, why don't you send me your phone number by email?